so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time today, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And I am thrilled you are joining today of all days, because today marks the second of our 3-day epic series for the Nature for All Festival. So I'm the new Canadian coordinator of the Nature for All Network. This is over 500 organizations around the world working to both preserve nature and make sure that people, wherever they are around the world, have access to it and can enjoy it and come to fall in love with it every bit as much as I am. So thank you guys. We've been doing great programs all day. If you've been tuning in, we were joined by Dr. Boris Worm about Ocean School. We chatted with Peter Soroyi about key biodiversity areas, and we just wrapped up with Aaron Jacob from the Yellowstone to Yukon initiative. It's been a thrilling day on preservation of wildlife, and I'm so glad you're here to dive in with our last program of the day. So there's no better capstone for a program in a festival like this today than our speaker. We are joined by Alysa McCall, and she is the education lead, queen of polar bears. She does it all. She's been on so many programs with us, and she represents Polar Bears International, an amazing organization that works to protect the apex predator on our planet, the largest land carnivore, a truly unbelievable species. For anyone who's seen one in the wild in person or even in a zoo, they are such a special creature, and I'm so excited we get a chance to learn more about them today and all the amazing work that PBI and others are doing to protect them. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Alysa. Thank you so much for joining us today, and take us away.
Hi, thanks so much, Jesse, and thank you everyone for being here today. I always love speaking to classrooms, especially when it's Canadian classrooms, as a Canadian myself. So behind me right now, you'll see something I'll reference a bit later. This is actually a live camera in Wapusk National Park in Manitoba. And we have live cameras there that run all year round in different areas, but currently we've got 2 going, and we are still streaming them because the polar bears are still on land. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. The Hudson Bay freeze up is a bit late this year, so keep an eye out. There's still polar bears around, and we'll come back to this. But I am going to share my screen because I have some cool photos I want to show you first. And there's some cool facts I'd also like to share. So we are going to do, the screen share. I just tested it too. There we go.
There has to be something going a little wrong, otherwise there's no fun in the podcast.
Right? It's got to do the whole thing. And there we go. I got it. Here we go. Allow. How's that looking?
That looks good. We've got you up in the middle.
Perfect.
Of this. Beauty. You're good.
Nailed it. Okay, so this is me. I am the Director of Conservation Outreach and Staff Scientist at Polar Bears International. And I currently live in Whitehorse, Yukon, though I have lived all across Canada, and I've been studying polar bears for just over 10 years now. So I grew up in British Columbia. I've studied polar bears mostly in Manitoba, but also up in the Northwest Territories, and now living in the Yukon, where there are no polar bears, but I still can work from home, and then I travel to where the polar bears are, and of course I get to talk to people about them. So today, kind of the theme that Jesse mentioned, we're talking about preservation. And preservation is truly what is at the heart of what we do at Polar Bears International. Our goal is to keep polar bears throughout the Arctic, always. And we do that through a combination of research, education, media, and advocacy. And really, all this means is that we learn about them, we talk about them, we share cool pictures and stories about them, and then we talk to people about how we want to keep them in the Arctic. So it's really important and it's really interesting, and we have a lot of fun doing it. And like Jesse said, being actually able to go see a polar bear truly is life-changing. They are just the most amazing animal. And of course, as Canadians, they are an icon of Canada. They really, really are. And again, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but Canada has 2/3 of the world's polar bears. We really are the main home that polar bears have on this planet. You can see them all throughout different parts of our pop culture. You see them on our toonie. People just connect with polar bears. Even if you've never seen one in person, I'm sure you know some things about them. You've seen them on your TV. You kind of see them pop up randomly all over, depending on where you live. They are such an important part of Canadian culture in a lot of ways. And I think that's even a better reason and more of a reason to make sure that we're preserving them. So polar bears have a lot of special titles. Jesse already mentioned they are the largest land carnivore. So they are the biggest bear out of all 8 bear species. They are the most carnivorous bear by far out of all 8 bear species. They are the most aquatic bear because they are actually a marine mammal. Now, all the other bears, pandas, brown bears, black bears, sun bears, these are all terrestrial bears. Every other bear is pretty happy living on land, eating land food, not the polar bear. The polar bear, their Latin name, Ursus maritimus, even means sea bear. They are truly, truly tied to the ocean, and more importantly, frozen ocean, which is sea ice. Without sea ice, there are no polar bears. They make their living out on the sea ice. One reason that Canada is especially special when it comes to polar bears is that we do have areas where polar bears spend the summer on land, which isn't the case all over the world, but we are actually able to see polar bears on land here. And I think sometimes that makes people think, oh, well, they can live on land just fine. But truly, we're only seeing them in the summer months. They want to be out on that sea ice. They make their living out on the sea ice. They need to be on sea ice. And that is because this is their main prey. So polar bears rely on a diet of seals, and more specifically, seal blubber. So I mentioned that polar bears are the most carnivorous bear, but really, we sometimes call them lipovores, which means they like to eat fat. If they could, and when there's plenty of food, they will just strip the blubber off of seals and they will just eat this fatty blubber. They will leave the meat if they have enough food to go around. They really are adapted to make use of this fat, and they have a very, very high conversion rate of how much fat they eat versus how much actually goes on their body. So it's the most efficient food for them. And they have at least eight differences in their digestive system compared to their most close ancestor, which is the brown bear. So they have 8 differences in their digestion alone that allows them to process fat super, super efficiently compared to protein and carbohydrates, so meat and plants. And again, all these other bears, including brown bears, they can process protein, they eat meat, they eat plants, and that's what their body really wants, and that's what they're really efficient at breaking down. Not so much with polar bears. In fact, we know that when they have a diet of too much protein in zoos, they don't do very well and they don't live as long. So they're changing even what they're feeding polar bears in zoos to make sure it's this high diet of fat, because that's what's best for polar bear bodies, believe it or not. Not for humans, but definitely for polar bears. And we see this in a few different ways. This is why polar bears are the biggest bear, because blubber is the most calorically dense food on the planet. So a pound of blubber has more energy, more calories in it than almost anything else you find. And so when polar bears are eating so many calories, that's giving them the energy, that's making them able to be big and stay warm in the Arctic and able to, power them to move across the Arctic landscape. We also see it in things, for example, like mother's milk. So polar bears are mammals, and of course they feed their babies milk, and they have the fattiest milk we find on land of any other animal. And that's what allows those cubs to grow fast. And I'll show you a cubby picture in just a minute here. Another interesting thing about polar bears, because of their fat diet, is that their jaws are actually a bit weaker than other bear jaws, believe it or not. So polar bears, they kind of get this reputation as this maybe dangerous bear or really vicious. And yeah, they can be for sure, but sometimes people think that just translates into pure strength. And they're incredibly, incredibly strong. But because their diet is squishy blubber, their jaws aren't as strong as grizzly bear jaws. So grizzly bears actually have a lot more power in their mouth than polar bears. And polar bears kind of also have a flattened head. And that helps them get in and out of those seal holes. You see that polar bear on the left there. He's waiting patiently by a seal hole for a seal to come up and breathe. And they've got these long necks and flattened skulls that helps them get in and out of the seal hole to pull seals up. But that all translates to a weaker jaw. So we can really, really see these adaptations that polar bears have to eat fat that comes from seals. So I'm just basically really trying to convince you that polar bears absolutely need seals to survive long term, and they can only get those seals by traveling on sea ice. So polar bears do navigate across sea ice, and it's not easy. Sea ice is constantly moving, it's shifting. It can be like a treadmill out there on the Arctic Ocean, and polar bears are so smart and amazing that they can navigate that ice. They are excellent swimmers. They can swim for, if they have to, days on end, but swimming is very costly. So I talked about how polar bears eat so much energy, they consume so much, but they burn so much, especially when they're swimming. And so they'd rather not swim a long ways if they can help it. They'd rather walk. And this makes them also the most mobile four-legged animal on the planet above water, of course, the four-legged animals. So that basically means they move more than tigers, than lions, than other bears, than elephants. These bears, some of them, especially the ones up in Norway, for example, their home ranges can be 500,000 square kilometers. So that is massive. That's bigger than some Canadian provinces by a long shot. And that's just covered by one bear. So they move a ton. And that's because it's not so easy to find those seals. They really do have to be looking and searching. They're only successful about 1 out of every 10 times they hunt a seal. So they have to be really patient. They have an amazing sense of smell. They can smell a seal about a kilometer away. That helps them track down where they're going. They also navigate by the wind. So they try to turn upwind wherever they can. Well, they'll walk perpendicular, so they'll walk across the wind, kind of. So that means that they're getting all these different air streams from different areas. And as soon as they smell something good, then they'll walk upstream to the air. They'll walk against the wind until they find what smells so yummy. So they're so smart. And their feet are special. So I just want to point out this bear's feet right here. So the bottoms of their feet are a little bit sticky. They have these little bumps on them, and we call that papillae. It's just a fancy word for little bumps, and it gives them some traction on the sea ice because, of course, ice is pretty slippery. But winter tire companies have actually used the polar bear's foot as a model on which to base their tires because the polar bear's feet are so well suited for not skidding on ice, which is pretty cool. And polar bear feet, especially in the spring, can be a little stinky. So polar bears use sea ice for hunting and traveling, but also for mating. And if you can imagine, again, how vast the sea ice is, how it's always moving, how spread out these bears are, it can be hard to find a buddy out on the sea ice. And so females, if they're ready to mate in the spring, their feet actually release a special smell or pheromone. And they will leave smelly footprints across the sea ice. And males will sniff out these footprints and follow the female for days on end if they have to until they can find her out on the ice. So polar bears really do have amazing adaptations. You know, they've got their very thick fur, 2 layers of thick fur to keep them warm. They've got the short ear and tails to prevent heat loss. They have no end of adaptations to help them survive in this Arctic cold, chilly landscape. And of course, they're cubbies too. So their cubs are born so small, just like, you know, most bear species really. So the mom goes into the den. About now, all the polar bear pregnant females will be in a den, and they'll be giving birth in the next month or so. And we assign all cubs a birthday of January 1st, just to make it easy on us humans to keep track. But of course, that varies. And the cubs are born only about a pound or two, about the size of a stick of butter. They are blind, they're pretty helpless. But again, that mother's milk is so fatty. It's like us drinking whipping cream. And those cubs grow incredibly fast, and they'll go from a pound or two to over 20 pounds in just a couple months. And if you can imagine a human child growing over 10 times its size in just a couple months, that would just be terrifying. So we don't grow that way, but it's important that bears do, because after a couple months, the mom is going to leave her den with her cub or two in tow, and they're going to head out on the sea ice, and she needs to start hunting right away because at this point, she's gone many months without eating and she is hungry. So yeah, cubs stay with their mom for about 2.5 years approximately. And mom will have a litter. That means about every 3 years if she's very regular. So polar bears do reproduce slowly and not in large amounts. So that's part of the reason we're so concerned with preservation. Because for animals that reproduce more slowly, they have fewer cubs over a longer period. It's really important that those cubs are making it to adulthood. But it's, you know, it's hard to be a polar bear cub, especially when your life is changing. And it does depend on where we are in the Arctic, about, you know, kind of how polar bears move and where they go. You can kind of see here, we're looking down on North America and Canada. Every one of these shapes or polygons, every different color is a different polar bear subpopulation, we call it. So there are 5 different countries that have polar bears. Canada, of course, the United States and Alaska, Russia, Norway, Greenland. And we've broken all the polar bears in the world down into 19 subpopulations. So there's approximately 23,000 to 26,000 polar bears across the Arctic, we think. It's very hard to count them. Right at the North Pole there, that big shape, there's really not a lot of polar bears there. They prefer to be closer to land because that means that The water is more shallow, relatively more shallow, which means it's more productive. It gets more sunlight. That means there's more algae growing in the ice. And I'm going to show you a picture of that in a sec. And the food chain is more productive. So basically, it just means there's more seals. So they like to be out on the ice, but not too far away from land where it's super cold and dark, because they want to be where the seals are ultimately. That's where they're going to be. And then we can see here that there are different types of sea ice. So sea ice is not only just frozen ocean water, but there's all different types depending on the patterns. And the main reason I want to show you this is I just want to point out again, look at Canada. Canada has every one of these types of sea ices. So they have the seasonal sea ice, which is in Hudson Bay, which I mentioned. They have the archipelago, which we think will be the very last place that sea ice stays, even if things don't change and everything keeps warming up. We think there'll still be sea ice here. They have convergent and divergent. So they have all these different patterns of sea ice in Canada. And I think that's really important when we think about long-term preservation of Canadian polar bears. And we can see that we do have changes happening in Canada. So there are several polar bear populations who are declining right now in Canada. Some are probably stable, at least one or two are doing okay, they're doing well, maybe even rebounding, but you'll notice a lot of polar bear populations around the world, we simply do not have the data to say anything. And that's because polar bear research is really dangerous, it's really expensive, it's cold, it's limited, it's dark, and we are struggling to really learn as much as we want to learn about polar bears as fast as we can. And we can use technology and we can share information with different partners and we can learn a lot, but there's still so much we need to know about polar bears. We do know their ice habitat is changing though, and that is why we are concerned and we're pushing forward with preservation or conservation measures. But sea ice, just to backtrack for a second here, it's not only about polar bears. So polar bears need sea ice for hunting and mating and traveling. But sea ice actually is so incredibly important to our entire planet. This is one reason why polar bears make such a great umbrella species. It's because things we do to protect polar bears are really the things we're doing to protect sea ice, which really are the things we're doing to protect this whole food chain and ourselves. So we like to say that sea ice is to the ocean what soil is to a forest. Sea ice is growing the base of the food chain in the Arctic. Algae is growing inside that sea ice because when sea ice freezes, it's salty and it expels the salt, and there's all these channels that are available, and algae will go right in there and it's feeding the little creatures that feed the fish, that feed the seals, that feed the bears. And of course, there's whales in this ecosystem, and we can't forget the people. People live around the Arctic and they also depend on a healthy food chain and a healthy, stable sea ice habitat for their own activities and their own lifestyles. So it's incredibly important that we keep sea ice around. But even more than that, even outside the Arctic, sea ice acts as Earth's air conditioner. So no matter where you are right now, even if someone right now was calling in from Australia or South America, sea ice helps cool the entire planet. It is so important. It is so vast and white that it reflects sunlight away from the Earth. And this has a net cooling effect. So it's preventing all this extra warmth from being absorbed into the water. And that has a cooling effect on the entire planet. It's helping regulate us. So if we're losing too much sea ice, we're absorbing too much more heat and we're getting a bit of a feedback loop here. We don't want that. So this is just to say it's truly, truly important that we keep sea ice in the Arctic for polar bears, but also for people all around the world. And again, that's why polar bears are such an incredible icon for our changing climate. And we do know that we are losing Arctic sea ice right now. We are seeing a decline. And this is basically because, we're burning too many fossil fuels. And when we burn fossil fuels, we're releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide acts as a heat trapping blanket. And when you thicken a heat trapping blanket, you just get too hot, basically. So what's happening is we've got all these emissions in the atmosphere. We're pumping this pollution, these emissions into the atmosphere. The heat can't leave. And we're trapping it and we're just making it uncomfortably warm. And it's causing a lot of climate disruptions, including changes in Arctic sea ice. And if we did nothing to change anything, we could lose up to 2/3 of the world's polar bears by the end of this century. But the great thing is that we know we don't have to do that. We know what the solutions are, and there's a lot we can do for polar bears in the meantime. and for the planet. So currently they are listed as vulnerable on the red list. So this is the international listing. They're listed as vulnerable due to climate change. So I mentioned before, we might have still up to 26,000 polar bears in the Arctic, and that is great news because they're not on the brink of extinction right now. They're not. We have time to protect them, time to protect their habitat. We have time for polar bears, and that is the best news. We can keep them in the Arctic, and we can do this through a variety of ways. Something at Polar Bears International that we do is that we do a lot of different research projects. And these look very different depending on where we are in the Arctic. We do research and support research all around the globe. We work with governments, with communities, with zoos, with anyone, honestly, that makes a good partner. We work with them. And we use a variety of different techniques. So we look at denning with cameras. We work with communities with their traditional ecological knowledge or IQ. We're doing more genetics research than ever, tracking polar bears with collars or brand new tags that we stick on the fur. We do surveys. And then a big growing one I just want to highlight for 1 minute here are the human-bear interactions we're seeing. And this one is especially relevant to Canada and especially relevant to Ontario, Manitoba, and Nunavut. So what's happening is that polar bears are spending longer periods of time on land. As we are losing sea ice in some places, especially Hudson Bay, we are seeing polar bears forced onto land for longer. So in Hudson Bay, in Western Hudson Bay particularly, polar bears are already spending about a month longer on land than they used to. And when they go a month longer without eating, they're a little hungrier. They're more likely to seek out different food sources. And this is not good for the bears, and it's not good for the people. So how do we support both sides of this equation? And Polar Bears International is doing multiple projects on this, but a really cool one I just wanted to mention now is our Detect and Protect program. So we are currently testing 4 different types of radar and using artificial intelligence to train the radar systems what a polar bear looks like. So this is just an example of one. So we set up at the school in Churchill, Manitoba. It's right on the coast, and at certain times of the year, this kind of becomes a polar bear highway along the coast here. So we set up a radar system, and it was detecting when it saw something move. Basically, it was detecting on everything at first, every bird, every ATV, every dog. But over time, we've been training it. So now it's a lot better at only telling us when it sees a polar bear, which you'll see right here. So you'll see the camera moving a bit right now. There's not a human doing that. That is the radar doing it. And we were actually inside a buggy when it pinged us on this bear, and it basically said, hey, there's a bear outside, and we looked at the camera and it had zoomed in on it and we got to watch it. So this process will take, it's a little more complicated than I make it sound, and I'm not the one doing the training of the AI, but we are hoping that eventually we could have small units to send out to communities across the north, and they could set up this radar system at a garbage dump or a playground or wherever they need a bit of extra safety. And it could be scanning all the time, and it could alert people via text message or siren or light or whatever they want, and tell them when a polar bear is coming in, so they have lots of time to get inside somewhere safe, and the bear doesn't startle anyone, and there's no negative consequences for either people. There's time to scare the bear away. So this is something we are really focused on right now, and it's been a really great project. But another big piece of what we do is education. So we do a lot of outreach and videos and photography. And this, what you're seeing here, this is a picture of Buggy One. And I was just on Buggy One a couple weeks ago. And this is every fall outside of Churchill, Manitoba, which is sometimes called the polar bear capital of the world. We drive around on Buggy One and we talk about polar bears because there's polar bears all around us. They're waiting on the shores of Hudson Bay for the ice to freeze up. And we talk to students just like I'm doing now, and we answer questions and we show them live polar bears. And this is just a clip from the cam 1 year. The cameras are actually better quality now, they're 4K. But this is a bear that was digging around and caught a little meadow vole. So we got to watch her get a little snack. Usually we don't get to see the bears eating anything. They're just waiting patiently on land for months until they get to head out back on the sea ice. But this bear had a nice snack that day. So this is just an example of the things we see on the cam. We see sparring, we see lots of interactions, we see moms and cubs, and these are streamed via explore.org. And watching polar bears live and being able to talk about them is a great way to help build some joy for these animals. So it's a lot of fun. So the vole did not have a good day, but the bear had a nice little snack. And I just wanted to highlight now, so this is a satellite image of where we currently are at with the freeze up across the Arctic. So this is the time of year that the sea ice is fully freezing across the north. And the orange is where the ice edge basically should be right now. And we should be seeing a lot more ice in Hudson Bay at the moment. You can see Hudson Bay down over to the left here. Usually the last few years, the bears in Hudson Bay were already out on the sea ice hunting right now. That is not the case at the moment. So we're anxiously watching the satellite images every day to see when the bay will start freezing up. And it should be soon now that the ice is starting to come down. But there are still polar bears on the bear cams that I mentioned because they have nowhere to go. At the end of the day, basically what we're just asking is for people to, get interested in polar bears, get interested in Canada's icon. They really are just the coolest, literally coolest animal out there, I think. They're so incredible in so many different ways. They really, truly are a special species. And one of the coolest things about them, again, is that whatever we're doing for them, we're doing for us. And so what we ask people to do is to, push our leaders, get together, vote if you're old enough for an energy shift. We need to shift away from burning fossil fuels and toward more renewable energy resources like wind and solar, the types of energy that do not pump extra heat trapping emissions into the atmosphere. When we do burn fossil fuels, we need to do it better and more efficiently. We need to do it more cleanly, and we have that technology already. That's a great thing. We already have all these things in place. We just need to adopt them at a larger scale. And one of the biggest things we can do is talk about it, especially for students. You can use social media, but you don't have to. Even talking about this sort of thing, about polar bears or about your own future, about climate, about things you're just seeing around you, your hopes, your fears, anything like that. Talking about it helps move that societal needle. It helps societal shift happen when people are more willing to talk about it. And that's part of why we love getting involved with Nature for All, because it's such a huge way to join together and just talk about our love of nature, how we want to preserve Canada for the future, for your future, for the future of polar bears, but really for the future of us all. And so thank you, Nature for All, and thank you, Jessie, for having me today. Always super fun to get to talk about polar bears more and more. And yeah, I really look forward to everyone's questions. And I just wanted to highlight our website, explore.org is where the polar bear cams are. And then thank you to Nature for All. I'm going to end my show now.
Alysa, that was the best. If you want to come out of screen share, see us again, have a bit of a conversation, I'll put you in the background for just one quick second to say, our folks on YouTube, if you guys want to share questions, Mr. Hancock, as usual, in Georgetown, has asked, I think, 197 questions over the course of your broadcast, which is great. So way to go, classroom. Mr. Police Class, thank you so much for sharing as well, and hopefully you get some questions to kick us off. Ms. Metcalf, Ms. Hurley, our Coburn Middle School friends, I'm going to come to you live in just a second. But Alysa, let's kick it off with one of the many questions online. So many here. Mila wants to know how they see underwater. I shared a hunting video of polar bears hunting because that was one of their questions. And diving and catching a seal under the water. Like, what's the deal? I guess it's very neat.
Yeah, so they can see underwater just like we can. They usually don't have to. They much prefer to catch seals when seals are out on the ice, or to pull seals out of the water, because usually seals can outswim polar bears under the water. But when polar bears do dive, we've even seen them dive for seaweed. They have something over their eyes called a nictitating or nictating membrane. So it's like the third eyelid. I think maybe even cats have that. So they do have a third eyelid, which also helps them in the glare of the sun on the sea ice when they're walking on the sea ice. You know, when you get white eyes because it's just so bright out there. So they do have something in their eyes that can help protect them, definitely.
Yeah. Very, very cool. And by the way, thank you for saying nictitating or nictating. I never know what it is personally, so it's one of the two. Or maybe it's both. Tomato, tomato. Let's head to Ms. Metcalf's class. If you guys want to unmute your mic, joining us in Cambridge, which has the best pizza in Canada, by the way. Ms. Metcalf, come on in. And
Hi, sorry. The timing is kind of off from what the class is watching, so it sounds a little funny.
That's okay.
But Sugra has a great question right here. Go ahead.
Can a polar bear eat another polar bear?
Yeah.
Good question. Can a polar bear eat another polar bear? They can. And we actually have seen that happen. It usually is the big males that go after another polar bear. And it's usually when they're really desperate and hungry. And we see not all polar bears do it. It seems to be just certain ones do it. But they will cannibalize each other on occasion. Not super widespread, but it does happen.
Very, very freaky. My favorite thing with polar bears in the last 5 years is seeing them hunt whales where they'll actually grab a beluga and pull them out of the water. Like, when I was told that, I did not believe it until I saw it in a BBC documentary. Just wild to think that is like on the food chain. It's just crazy.
Crazy.
Alysa, let's head to Miss Hurley's class. They're joining us in London, Ontario today. If you guys want to unmute your mic, you're good to go. Hey.
Go ahead.
Is climate change the only reason polar bears are becoming endangered?
Great question. Is climate change the only reason? So it is by far the main reason. Absolutely. It's the sea ice loss, habitat loss translates to loss of food, but we are seeing polar bears have other threats as well. So there is rising pollution in the Arctic, and that pollution is impacting reproduction in some areas already. And we're also seeing just more humans move into the Arctic. So there's more shipping. There's more of a risk of an oil spill now than ever. And we know an oil spill would be not great for polar bears. So climate change is the most immediate threat, but there are some other things happening, all related to, you know, humans not maybe thinking ahead for what's best for the environment.
Very, very cool. We've been doing the climate discussion the entire Nature for All festival. It's a big thing of what we do, of course, as an organization. And so I'm really glad we got that brought up for our kids today. Coburn Middle School, I'm going to come to you guys in just a second. I know you've got the two devices on, so there might be a bit of reverb. Let's see if we can get your question audibly. Hi, guys. Hey, cool. No reverb. You're good. Come on up. Ask your question. Welcome in, guys.
Leah, can you behave, please?
Go ahead. Okay. Go ahead. I'm trying to remember. Are polar bears dangerous to humans? Like, can they eat them?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. Polar bears can be dangerous to humans. So it looks like polar bears usually don't want to be around humans. They don't want to be dangerous. But when things happen and a polar bear is hungry or stressed or ends up in a community where it really shouldn't be, they can hurt humans and have killed humans before. And that's part of the reason we are so committed to supporting communities in different ways as they deal with more polar bears being on land. We want to keep the people safe. We want to keep the polar bears away from the towns because it can be dangerous for both, definitely.
Well, I'm really glad you showed that cool radar system. And I must say, having visited Churchill this summer, when you're picking up ATVs, it would just be constant. Like, you'd never stop picking up ATVs. You got to train it for that.
Yeah.
Mr. Please class joining us in the horn pain. So nice to have horn pain in. They're always in these broadcasts. This is great. What's the biggest polar bear you've personally seen, or just in general? How many polar bears have you seen in the wild? I love that shot with you, with the one with the babies at the beginning, trained from the helicopter. Very cool stuff. So do tell.
Yeah. Oh gosh. At this point, I've definitely seen a few hundred polar bears. I'm not sure the actual count. The biggest polar bear I've personally ever handled has been approximately 1,700 pounds. So very, very big male. And the largest polar bear that was ever handled, or that we definitely know about, was 2,200 pounds, and he was in Alaska. So I don't even know how many students that would be. That's a lot. That is a big animal.
We've done this before, but 2,000 pounds is about the size of a leatherback turtle, which is my most, I guess, anything. So it's the size of like an entire small classroom. Like if you're grade 4, it's like all the kids in the class together are one polar bear, which is wild.
Wild.
Very cool. Ms. Metcalf, come on back in. I know you're a little delayed, but you're good to go. Just unmute that mic and you're all set.
Why do polar bears have such big paws?
Yeah, why do polar bears have such big paws? So one of the main reasons is that, so polar bears are very heavy, like we just talked about, and of course they're walking on ice. And I don't know if you guys have ever tried to walk on ice that's kind of frozen and it cracks. Of course, if polar bears have really big paws, they can spread their weight out better. So we call that weight distribution. And if you're really heavy, but you can really spread your weight out, you're less likely to fall through the cracks in the ice. And something fun that we see when the ice is just starting to freeze up and polar bears are testing it, sometimes they'll really distribute their weight and they'll get down even almost on their belly and they'll do like the belly shuffle across the ice. And we call it the polar bear starfish or the polar bear shuffle. And they're really spreading their weight out to see how much the ice can take, because they'd rather not fall through if they can help it, because it takes a lot of energy to dry off. But one of the biggest reasons is just it helps spread their weight out. But you're right, their feet are massive, especially the big males, way bigger than my head, definitely.
I'm delighted at how much joy you take in doing the polar bear, shuffler, starfish in a broadcast. That's amazing. Let's head to London, Miss Hurley's group. Just unmute that mic and you're good to go, guys.
Have you ever got to touch a polar bear?
Ooh.
I have got to touch a polar bear. So when we touch polar bears, we don't do it very often. There's only a couple times of the year we go actually handle polar bears. And we only do that because by handling polar bears, we get really, really important data. We can measure how long they are, how thick they are. If we capture the same polar bear over several years, we can see how they're growing, how healthy they are. We can take samples of fat and fur. So it is really important, but it's very limited because it's dangerous. And we prefer to leave the bears alone as much as we can. But at certain times of the year, the fall and the spring particularly, we'll go out for a couple weeks. We do find the polar bears by helicopter. They are tranquilized with a very safe drug that's been tested over decades. The polar bear falls asleep for about an hour. Safely, we make sure we're monitoring its temperature and its breathing and that it's comfortably laid out. We take the samples, we measure it, we make sure it's tucked up and safe, and then we leave as fast as we can. And we usually circle the bear in the air to make sure there's no other bears around that could come check it out and bother it while it wakes up. And almost always the bear's waking up by the time we leave, and then it's on its way the next day. So I have been lucky enough to handle some polar bears, and we've learned a lot through doing it, but it doesn't happen very often. It's pretty limited.
Let that be a lesson to you kids. You know, you finish high school, you go to university, you become a scientist, and maybe sometime, if you're lucky, you end up getting to fly in helicopters to some of the most remote regions of the planet, dart the apex predator, land your helicopter, and go take blood samples from it. Pretty awesome. In fact, this whole day has been like a testament to how romantic it can be to be a scientist and how awesome it is. So very cool, and thank you for sharing that story. We're going to take 2 quick YouTube questions, then I'm going to head back to Toronto for Coburn Middle School final wrap-up one. Mr. Please class, a question we all want to know. How long do polar bears live? And I know you might have mentioned this, but I really want to drive the point home. We've been getting it several times in the chat.
Great question. Yeah. So polar bears live, so females actually live longer than males. So females can live into their mid or late 20s, usually, sometimes early 30s. And males live usually into their late teens, early 20s. And that's because when males are in the spring, they're out looking for females, they fight each other really hard for the limited number of mates that are out there. And when polar bear males fight each other, they can really do some serious damage. And so it takes a big toll on their bodies. So the males don't live quite as long. But in captivity, we know in a zoo setting, when polar bears are a little bit more pampered and they don't have as much to worry about, they live longer. And we know that the oldest polar bear ever recorded was 42 years old, and she lived in Winnipeg, and her name was Debbie.
How cool is that? How nice. Thank you for giving the name as well. That's awesome. Mr. Hancock's class, again, so many questions on YouTube, which is great. What's the usual temperature they're used to? Is there like an ideal thing that they're at? Like where they, I don't know. How do you measure something like that? I just like the question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And it's actually, this is one of those questions that when scientists get together and we're just hanging out over lunch, we'll talk about it because we don't really know what their ideal is, but we know it's below 0, so it's below freezing. We know they're comfortable into the minus 40s, especially if they're moving a little bit. And we know that they can overheat really quickly above 0, especially above like 10 degrees Celsius. They don't move a lot when it's warm because it's so easy for polar bears to overheat. We don't know exactly, but I will say when the temperature drops below 0 in Churchill and there's a bit of snow on the ground, the bears become a lot more active. They seem to be a little happier and they're more likely to play fight and do fun stuff. So I would say as a polar bear, minus 20 is looking pretty good or so-ish.
Cool.
I guess, yeah.
I love that. Let's head to Coburn Middle School to wrap us up. Time flies and you're having fun, everybody. So you shared a great question in the chat. Share it live on camera. Hi, guys.
Which one? Hey guys, unplug the green thing. And then
What? Where's the green thing?
No, please take your time all day.
Which one?
unplug it from the off.
Oh, there.
The green.
This one is here.
Oh my god.
It's right there.
It's the green.
When polar bears are not like when it's like summer, what do they eat? Because like they eat seals.
Yeah.
But it's cold.
That's honestly, it's such a good question. So nothing. Yeah, and that's something I could have been a little more clear about is that when polar bears do come on land, they have nothing to eat. And that's part of why they are searching these communities for food. They're just hanging out. You saw that one bear ate a vole. We'll see them eat some seaweed and some berries. They'll eat eggs, but they're really not getting the fat they need. So polar bears have adapted to go months without eating seals, but that means they really do need to eat seals when those months are up. And they're right now very, very eager to get that sea ice back in Hudson Bay so they can go eat again, because they haven't had a real meal since about June at this point. So they're hungry.
Yeah. See, like, again, we could go all day with polar bears. It's one of the coolest animals on this planet. I do encourage anyone who has more questions on YouTube or otherwise, check out polarbearsinternational.org. Explore.org is behind you if you want to see some of these amazing live streams that they put on. And at Polar Bears, they're on all the social media platforms. Great imagery, great information, anything you could want to know, and so much more. And of course, as Alysa was kind enough to mention, this is part of our Nature for All festival. So if you want to check out resources from around the globe, so many incredible nature organizations, natureforall.global, and particularly their Discovery Zone with all the education resources for teachers. Alysa, this has been so much fun. Is there like a last message you want to send to all our kids live and on YouTube today about all the work that you're doing?
I just want to thank you so much. I really do think I've got one of the best jobs in the world. And if you're interested in learning more, please do check out our website. We'll have the cams, check those out. And thank you so much for your interest. And don't forget to talk about it. Talk about polar bears, or just talk about what you care about. It's important that we talk to each other about what's important. So thank you so much.
That message has been underlying all our conservation programs today. So again, tell your friends, tell your family. It makes a world of difference. Alysa, this has been so much fun. As you know from having done many broadcasts with us, I'm going to bring in all our teachers to say a big thank you and farewell. So Ms. Metcalf, if you want to unmute your mic, Miss Hurley, unmute your mic, and our Coburn team, thank you all so much for being here. Have a wonderful day, everyone.